faculty at Rabindrag Psychotherapy Research Institute Trust at Kolkata. He has also extended his expert services to various forensic science laboratories and handled some of the real life cases of Delhi Police, Haryana Police, and CBI Lucknow as well, which consisted mainly of forensic psychological investigative techniques like polygraphy, narcoanalysis, and BEOS. Apart from that, he has also been engaged in counseling sessions as well. As his main expertise is in the investigative psychology domain, he not only covers the core field of forensic psychology, but also covers the field of criminal psychology and criminology as well. He has also been a part of a few major project works like understanding the phenotypic traits of serial killers, individuals' biting behavior personality, understanding nonverbal cues via different psychotromic tests, etc. He has published a good number of research and review papers in many reputed journals, which mainly concern the field of forensic psychological investigations. He had attended many forensic conferences of both national and international and present many research papers. In one of them named Cognitive Neuroscience Society India on emerging trends in cognitive neurosciences, forensic and clinical applications, where he presented a research paper entitled as Experimental Knowledge of Event-Based versus Learning Through Repetition of Information-Based Memory, where he was being awarded as a Best Research Paper Award. I heartily welcome you for today's webinar, sir. Thank you for being with us.
Thank you so much, ma'am, for the brief introduction.
Thank you, Pravesh.
So without any further ado, so let's get started with today's session. Just
Yes, sir, please continue.
And then let's proceed. Yeah, sure. Just give me a minute. Sir, could you please make me the host so that I can share my screen?
Vilas, please be on the job.
I think you're already co-host. Just check. Yeah, now you can.
Okay.
Pravesh, sir, you can.
Yes. Okay. So very good morning to one and all of you. Okay.
Pravesh, sir, go to presentation mode. Yeah.
Is it visible, my PPT?
Yeah, it is visible. Just go to presentation mode.
Okay.
Slideshow.
Oh, just a minute.
Yeah.
Is it now visible?
Yeah, good to go.
Okay then. So good morning, everyone. So today's topic of discussions that what we are going to have is basically psychological autopsy, a futuristic approach in the investigative psychology domain. So basically, whenever we are talking about the concept of the investigative psychology, as if for now, I won't be going into the part of psychological autopsy, but let's just give you a clarity about what investigative psychology is. From a background of psychology, when you are contributing, you as a psychologist in the criminal justice system or in the legal aspects, okay, so that is what a investigative psychology domain is. So as I said, basically in an investigative psychology, there are basically three different main core fields that are being introduced. First is the forensic psychology, then it is a criminal psychology, and then afterwards it is to be followed by criminology. These three fields, which comes under the domain of investigative psychology, all of them are different, all of them are basically different from each other. So it's, more the students and the participants, they usually have a confusion that, it all the three fields sound similar, but the working nature, the prospects, the approach in the investigative psychology is completely different. So this is just a brief short introduction and a description about what investigative psychology is all about. And now let's discuss about the psychological autopsy, what exactly it is. Okay. And I request each and every one of you to kindly please be actively participated. Okay. Because I want this session to be more interactive. It's not going to be like a one-way session, to be very honest. So I request each and every participants, those who have joined for this webinar, so please do actively participate. Okay. So yeah. So the topic, I said, what we are going to discuss is basically psychological autopsy. Okay. Now, even let's exclude this word psychology. Okay, let's focus on the more important word, that is autopsy. Autopsy, in short, in a very simple words, it is also to be called it as what? A post-mortem, if I should say. Now, psychological autopsy. What is the main intent of conducting an autopsy? Anyone who would like to answer it? Like, what could be the one possible reason to conduct the autopsy? In order to identify what is the actual reason or the predictive reason the person is found to be dead. Okay, so the reason behind the death of the person is ultimately what? The autopsy, if I should say. But in terms of psychology and autopsy, how these two words are correlated. So basically, it is the state, the pre-mental state of the person. Okay, and in terms of that, you are finding it out the reason of the deceased. Okay, why, what reason this person was found to be dead. That is the first simple, on a very layman terms, if I should say, the definition of psychological autopsy can be. Now, if you look into this slide, the psychological autopsy, what it actually says, it is basically an important assessment tool. Whatever the tools, whatever the things that we discuss in investigative psychology, everything is to be assessed. No matter if it is a polygraph, no matter if you are even simply conducting any psychological test, everything has an assessment word associated with it. The same thing goes with the psychological autopsy also. It is also, yes, considered to be as one such important assessment tool, which helps in what? Which helps in actually identifying the aspects of the person's life that explain any mystery that shrouds their death. Something that is unexplainable, something which is not been explained yet. And on that particular purpose, we are conducting that particular session of psychological autopsy. Okay. Even if you talk about in terms of postmortems, talking about from the medical field background, also the autopsy part. So basically, the concern is more or like what? It is focused more on the actual reason behind the death. The same thing goes with psychological autopsy. They are also finding it out, the actual reason behind the death. What was the reason that the person was found to be dead? But in terms of the psychological process, that is what we called it as a mental health. Let me just give you a little glimpse about what mental health it is, because every psychologist or a forensic psychologist, they usually also, no matter whatever the sessions they take, they also talk about the mental health. The thing is, mental health is very, very important in our life. No matter how much physically you are fit, but ultimately, if you are not being a mentally fit individual, a person, if I should say, there's no use of being a physical fit person. So the thing is that, mental health plays a very vital role in our life also. And even in this part of psychological autopsy sessions, that what we are going to discuss for today. So this is a request as well as suggestion from my end also. Keep your mental health aspects at the first prior basis. Okay. Now, this is a simple definition of psychological autopsy that states that the psychological autopsy is what? It is an important assessment which is identifying the aspects of person's life, something which is unexplainable, and any mystery that shrouds their death. So ultimately, the concern is that, the unexplainable death of the person is basically what we called it as in psychological autopsy. Now, psychological autopsy is basically another set of definition that I have mentioned in my PPT. It states that it is an approach to scrutinize the risk factor. Now, what is a risk factor? Risk factor basically is a one such specific terminology that comes under the psychological part, basically that we as a psychologist are supposed to analyze those risk factor, and then afterwards we are supposed to give a solution towards it. It's more like a problem that has been presented in front of us as a psychologist, and we have to give a solution for that. Okay, so on a very simple prior basis, a risk factor definition it could be. So it is an approach to scrutinize what the risk factors along with the psychological state of an individual prior to death. So in the first slide, in the first definition, it was the unexplainable death, that is something hiding the reasons behind the death of the person. The second definition ultimately states that what are the risk factors that comes into the consideration and how you're supposed to analyze those risk factors. And ultimately, the mental health state or the psychological state of an individual comes into the existence. So these are the two important basics definition of psychological autopsy it can be. Now, what are the different approaches and aims that psychological autopsy they actually consider in that particular sense? So basically, it is assisting you, the coroner, in reaching to the accurate determination. Again, talking about the post-mortem or autopsy, if I should say, what they do, they give you the information, the exact information that what was the reason that the person was being killed or he was found to be dead. He was found to be dead, sorry. So it is the same thing. The psychological autopsy is also the same thing if you compare it with the post-mortem. It is the aim to assist the coroner in reaching the accurate determination, but the one word that needs to be added into it is basically the mental health part, the mental health aspect. Because when you are talking about autopsy with psychological perspective, the mental health domain is the first prior basis that will come into the consideration. Okay. Now, a process designed to assess variety of factors relating to the deceased. Now, what are those processes? What are those factors? Now, whenever we are talking about factors over here, it is basically talking about the risk factors. As I said, us as a psychologist professional, the very first thing is that, when you are contributing as a psychologist in the forensic settings or in the investigative settings, if I should say, it is more or like, you are analyzing those risk factors. We'll be discussing in the upcoming slides what are those different risk factors and how we can implement those risk factors as well. So it is also one such approach that is designed in such a way that assessment should be carried out in variety of factors or a risk factor, if I should say, relating to the deceased. And ultimately, the psychological evidences for unexplainable death. So on a prior basis, as if for now, what we can say that psychological autopsy is one such psychological evidences for unexplainable death, which is covering the unexplainable death. As I said in the beginning, something that is not been explained yet, and you are, as a forensic expert, giving a contribution that, how would you do the analysis and how would you, give the justification for this unexplainable death. This is what the medical examiners also do. Now, there are three important factors or three important domains that an examiner should cover in psychological autopsy. See, basically, we are conducting a psychological autopsy on the deceased person, the person who's already dead. Okay, the person who's already dead, so don't get confused in that particular terms. So basically, three prior domains that needs to be taken into consideration. The first one is basically behavior. Okay. I'm so sorry, just a minute for a while. Yeah. So behavior is one such part. Then it is to be followed by thoughts and feeling and the relationships. Very general things that while conducting the psychological autopsy on primary level, these are the three basic important domains that needs to be covered. Behavior of the behavior of the deceased. Okay, just a minute. No, yeah, behavior of the deceased. Now, before the death of the person, how was the behavioral pattern of the deceased? What does a psychologist do? He or she identifies the personality, the behavioral pattern, how the rapport formation was there with the person, with the other family members and everything. So it's the behavioral pattern which signifies the most important aspect. Then it is to be followed by thoughts and feelings. Deceased person who's already dead, what was his feelings towards certain things, towards certain stimulus, thought process, like in what particular approaches that he actually think for a certain situation. Like when this Centurion University, let me give you an example. When Centurion University organized a webinar that they are conducting the psychological autopsy session. So that thought process came into the existence that this is something new to it. Okay, so even a thought process has to be examined. But here, this is just a simple basic example that I have given. But here the thought process, how we are supposed to examine, that is a first important question, because we are supposed to examine the thought process of the person who is already dead. We are supposed to examine the thought process of the deceased person, if I should say. So it's the background history of the person that's supposed to be cross verified. Every police officers, whenever they go for the question and answering with the relative family members and everything, what they ask very first thing, they straight away jump into the background history of that person. Okay, so the same thing goes with the psychological autopsy professionals also. Okay, the medical examiners who's conducting a psychological autopsy in that particular terms. Thoughts and feelings. And thoughts and feeling is a one such important primary domain which needs to be rectified, which needs to be cross-checked, taking the background history of the person, how it was, the lifestyle and everything. Relationships basically in terms of how the relationship of the deceased person was with their family members, friends and everything. So again, we are going back to the historical part, the history part of the past life history of the person. So these are the three important major domains that what we are supposed to cover while conducting the session of psychological autopsy on the deceased person. Now, originally resolving as a means of equivocal deaths. Something which is not been assured, something which does not have any such kind of a certainty. So that is what a equivocal death means. Although the definition, it has already been mentioned in the PPT, I'll just read it out and then we can have a discussion for this. So equivocal deaths are what? They are those open to interpretation due to uncertainty. That's what I said. Something which is not being assured, something which is quite uncertain as to the circumstances surrounding to the death. Okay, so whatever the scenario, the current scenario the deceased was in, and how that person, the deceased person, has taken that particular current scenario into the consideration, and what steps and the decisions that he has taken. Something which is unacceptable in most of the cases of suicide. Okay, so this was a definition which was been given by Lax in the year of 2008, the definition of equivocal death. One more statement which was been proposed in the year of 2000 by Gibbert. It states that there may be two or more meanings to the cases may present at number of manners of the death. So how death has been occurred, reasons can be two or more than that, or if I should say, there can be an n number of reasons. A person who was mentally frustrated taken a poison. Now he was being mentally frustrated, that was a one certain fact. Second fact is that in order to that and in continuation with that, the example that I'm telling you, he decided to take a poison. Then afterwards, what kind of poison he was taking? So it's more or like the autopsy plus the psychological implications will came into the existence altogether, and the exact predictive results should be presented in the form of a report. So it is more or like there may be two or more meanings. or it can be there may be two or main factors in most of the cases, where the number of manners of death and mostly common the suicide or homicide. So basically the ultimate goal is that, the more you analyze the factor, or if I should say, the more you analyze the risk factor of the deceased person, the more you will reach out to the certain conclusion of that. So this was one of the line that was being given by Gibbert in the year of 2000. So this is just a short brief introduction about what psychological autopsy is. I hope each and every one of you are understanding, and if not, even in between of the session, you can just tell me that, sir, this is not something which I am not being able to understand, so I can explain it to you as well. Okay. Now, historical benchmark, how psychological autopsy came into the existence. What was the main concern that why the psychological autopsy was being implemented? Because all of us till now we were aware that, okay, there is something called a post-mortem, the autopsy. But how autopsy was been related in the psychological field, that is something new. And how we are relating in the forensics, that is a very quite interesting topic to cover it for. Okay. So the process of psychological autopsy, what it actually says, that basically it was been developed by the director of LA Los Angeles Suicide Prevention Center. So LA Suicide Prevention Center, which is Los Angeles Suicide Prevention Center, Edwin SCHNEIDMAN, whatever you want. I'm not being able to pronounce the second name, sorry. I usually pronounce Edwin SCHNEIDMAN, okay? So his idea was, and he came up with an idea to find out the intent of the deceased. Even if you look into the autopsy part, into the post-mortem part, what the doctors do, they find out the reason behind the person, the actual reason behind the person's death. But the thing is that what psychological autopsy does is that, they actually find the deceased of the person by what intent he is found to be dead. So it's the intention. Let me give an example. With the help of a knife, you can cut vegetables or fruits, or you can kill someone. So it's the intention which do matters a lot. And that intention is a one such important primary factor. Let me go back to the previous slide. Over here, what we have discussed is the risk factors, okay, and the important domains that what we are supposed to take into consideration. Okay. But over here, what we are supposed to take into consideration in continuation with the previous slide, what we have discussed, the intent, but the intent of the deceased, not the intent of the criminal or the suspect or the victim. The deceased person, as if for now, that what was his or her intention, and this person was found to be dead. That is the intent part that we are focusing more on to it. So psychological autopsy is doing what? From the historical benchmark of psychological autopsy, we can design one more state of definition that, it's the intent of the deceased that needs to be analyzed at the time of the death. So that can be also one such definition of psychological autopsy it can be. So intent of the disease at the time of the death, in order to analyze. Now what we are supposed to analyze, the intent along with the risk factors. What is the risk factors? It is a problem that has been presented, that has been put forward in front of you. So you as a psychologist professional or the psychiatrist professional, what you are supposed to do is that you are supposed to reduce or give a solution to it. So giving a solution to a problem is basically a risk factors in terms of in the field of psychology is. Okay. So, and how you're supposed to reduce it by it's a genuine thing that, if you're giving a solution to something, you will ultimately reduce or prevent the particular problem of that as well. So reducing a risk factor for the prevention of suicide. Now that suicide is a very important term and a key word of this particular session, that what we are going to have it for today. Okay, so it is ultimately doing what? It is ultimately introducing and implementing the state of risk factors in terms of that. Okay, so this is what the historical benchmark of psychological autopsy, that how it was been implemented, how it came into the existence and everything. Okay. Now, in continuation with that, SCHNEIDMAN has actually given 10 common points for suicide. And what here suicide is considered to be as, it is basically considered to be as a one such risk factor. And a risk factor that is a problem that has now, let's assume that, you are supposed to analyze the factors behind suicide and how you're going to give a solution of that particular problem. Okay. So before starting with this, I just wanted to tell one thing. Whatever the 10 pointers that has been mentioned over here, each and every point has a certain meaning to it, first of all, and we can relate with each and every approaches that what it has been mentioned in this particular slide. So SCHNEIDMAN commonalities of suicide basically tells you about the risk factors that have been associated with it, and us as a psychologist expert, how we are supposed to analyze the risk factor and give a solution towards it. So the first point says that the common purpose of suicide is to seek a solution. Let's make a scenario out of it. The first point says that a common purpose of the suicide is to seek a solution. When a person who is genuinely frustrated, who thinks like that, my life is completely useless or something like that, when the person thinks that my life has no meaning to it. So what is the solution for that? As a victim who is going to commit a suicide, that let's commit a suicide and let's get rid of this life which is giving me the negativity all the times. So that is the first main purpose. That is the 10 common approaches of SCHNEIDMAN suicide note is. So the common purpose of the suicide is to seek a solution. First thing, from a victim's point of view, that's what I'm talking about. But you as a forensic psychologist or a psychologist professional point of view, it has a different meaning to it. The common purpose of the suicide is to seek a solution is that you are supposed to find out why. In forensics, there is something that is to be called why the crime was being committed, how the crime was being committed, something like that. The same thing goes in this psychological autopsy and even the 10 common approaches of suicide also. Us as a psychologist, why? So you have to answer to that question of why this person has committed a suicide. The common goal of the suicide is cessation of consciousness. Something which has been cut off, something that is been not consistent throughout your life. The only thing that has been consistent throughout your life is the negativity, the failures that what you are continuously and consistently facing. So that is also a one such part that, us as a forensic psychologist, again, the question will come why he has committed a suicide with respect to what was that particular factor that was cutting off the person, okay, in his or her mindset. See, 90 to 95% or even more than that, let's say 99.9% of the cases when the person commits a suicide, the reason behind is mentally unfit person, depressive. Let me just give you an incident that I personally experienced last year. Actually, I was traveling in a train and I just met one of the persons, so we just having a conversation, a normal conversation. So he basically asked me that what you are doing and everything. So I told him that I'm from the field of psychology, I do counseling sessions and everything. So he said that that you do something with, you play with someone's mental health. So I said, I don't play with someone's mental health, I just give a solution how to get rid of your mental problems. So what he said is that he actually said in Hindi, अरे सर ये mental health तो अमीरों की बीमारी होती है. The thing is, this mental health part is belong to the rich people, because these rich people faces such kind of issue, not the middle class people. So in return of that, what I said to him is that, did COVID see who was middle class people, who's from rich class high society, or who was from poor family? No. and you know what is the outcome of COVID. Each and every one of us know what was the outcome of COVID. And in COVID phase, most of the cases that was been registered, the person who committed a suicide, the main reason behind was the mental health part. How COVID has affected individuals' mental health is also one such prior basis. So again, what we can consider COVID as a risk factors, and how COVID has affected the individual's mental health also is also a one such prior basis to look into consideration. So the first 2 points is somehow interrelated to each other. If you see, the first point says that the common purpose of suicide is to seek a solution, and the common goal of the suicide is to cessation of consciousness. That means what is one such thing that is cutting off.
I 1 minute. I can ask any question, sir. Actually, I raise one or last message.
You can ask the question right now, no issues.
Yeah, actually, I have while reading this psychological, sir. Actually, I have one question. Most of the forensic cases, hanging deaths are happening, sir. Most of the forensic medicines, they will receive the hanging deaths. So this hanging while they are doing, this is also in impact for the psychology, sir.
So,
Human
but the thing
psychology
is, yeah, let's bring the human psychology concept in this particular case. Let's assume a scenario that police officers has found a dead body who was hanged. Okay. Now the autopsy, the post-mortem sessions will be conducted over there. Okay. And you as a forensic expert, the medical expert who conducted an autopsy session, you will just give an suggestion that, this is the reasons and everything, but what about the mental state of the person? So that needs to be answered by the psychologist, or let's say by the psychiatrist professional who can answer that question very well. So it's the psychiatrist or the psychologist professional who will cover the mental state part. What is the thing that I said in the beginning of the slide, that an unexplainable death? What is that unexplainable meaning is that we have analyzed the physical state of the person, of the deceased, but we haven't examined the mental state of the person, and that is what the psychological autopsy fulfills that over there. So this is what the answer is. I hope it is clear.
Yeah, okay, thank you, sir. Thank you.
Yeah, please don't be hesitate. Okay, if you want to ask any questions in middle of the session, so it's good for me also. Okay, because I want this session to be more interactive. Okay, now I hope the first 2 common approaches of suicide is very much clear. Okay, now the common stimulus in suicide is intolerable psychological pain. So sir, that is again one such answer to your question that you have asked for. The mental state of the person which is quite intolerable. If that consistency of depression has been there throughout your life, it is intolerable psychological pain. Okay, so even what here the intolerable psychological pain is talking about, it is basically talking about a one such risk factor. Whatever the 10 pointers that what we are going to discuss today, each and every pointer, they do have a certain risk factors associated with it, and that risk factor needs to be analyzed at that particular point of an instant. Okay, so the common stimulus of suicide is, yes, the intolerable psychological pain. What I have said, even in the COVID phase and even before the COVID phase. Let's talk about farmers. Now they are not being able to get the support from the government in terms of financial perspective. So a financial perspective, government is not supporting, is one such a risk factors. And in continuation with that, it is making the farmers mentally frustrated. Whatever the set of loans they are taking, okay, they are not being able to fulfill that. So it's the frustration that is being generated out. It's the frustration who is being, there inside. And what is the ultimate solution to that? They'll commit a suicide. Okay. Then afterwards, the common stressors in suicide is the frustrated psychological needs. In January, actually, I would like to share one of the case that I handled. I visited Sabarmati jail in Ahmedabad. So over there, I was being called and I was supposed to counsel a serial killer. In January, it was in the phase of Uttarayan, because there is one festival in Gujarat that is to be celebrated. So I went to that particular Sabarmati jail with one of the psychiatrists. So we were supposed to counsel that person. Although he was being, you know, he was being get a punishment of this lifetime imprisonment. But the thing is that, you know, he was a serial killer. He was a psychopath actually. But when we counsel them, so the thing was, you know, we find his physical appearance, and what I noticed, his left hand forefinger, the index finger, was being chopped off. It was not there. All total there were 9 fingers. So I just asked him randomly that, you know, what was the thing that, you know, it has happened and everything. He said, it's my father who did this. So we just jump back to the case history, and we also had a discussion related to his you know, the past background history and everything, how his lifestyle was. So when he was 2 or 3 years old, a small kid, when he was, his mom passed away, and then afterwards it was his father who take the charge and everything. But the thing was, his father was alcoholic and drug addicted person, and there was a phase of his life when, you know, whenever his father never used to get a drugs or alcohol, so what his father used to do is that he used to beat his own son in frustration. Okay, so it's the frustration, it is a risk factor that comes into the existence, and how you are taking out the frustration, beating your own son. The thing was, then there was, when he was 17, 16 or 17 something, there was a one phase came into his life that, you know, his father was being frustrated so much, and in that frustration his father was the one who actually chopped off his own son's left hand forefinger. The thing was, although his father was being punished for that particular uh, act, what his father has done, but then afterwards, you know, how it has affected that person psychologically was a one such approach. So the fourth point, what I mean to say is that, you know, the common stress, it was the stress that was common throughout his life. His current age is now 29, because we had a discussion on that. I'm not going to reveal the name and everything. Okay. So the thing is that, you know, the common stress was basically that he was facing continuously from his childhood phase till now, the age of 29. As if for now, I'm not discussing the concept of suicide over here. I'm discussing the concept of what is the factor that makes the person stressful. We are conducting a webinar also. We have students. We can ask students also whenever they give an exam. Also, we were students also. When we used to give any kind of exam, we used to be in a zone of stress. But it is for some point of time. But that stress in that person's life was consistent. And then afterwards, a phase came that he decided that, you know, let's get rid of this stress. And what he did is that, you know, he killed his own father. And afterwards, what he did in revenge, he chopped his father left hand forefinger. All total, he murdered 8 individuals. The first victim was his father. And what he used to do is that, you know, whenever he used to kill the victim, and afterwards he used to chop off the left hand forefingers of their victim. So it was making him, you know, satisfactory as well. You know, committing something very unusual and something which is unacceptable by the society, but that person, whatever the incident that he is doing, whatever the act that he is doing, it is that act which makes the person satisfactory, giving the relaxation, giving the kind of a satisfaction. So from his particular concern, it was his psychological need. If I want to gain satisfaction, what I'm going to do, I'm going to kill my victim, and then afterwards I'm going to chop off the left hand forefinger of my own victim. And he confessed, and he said in front of my face कि मुझे कोई regret नहीं है. I don't have any such kind of regret what I have done. It was his psychological need. Let's talk about the sex offenders. We have, like, we in our country, most of the cases, it's belong from the sexual assault cases. Even we can say, from the theory of different psychological perspective, we do have there is a need, there is a sexual need of the person as well at the same point of time. So even it itself, it is a psychological need for that person. So now in terms of suicide, let's come back to the part of suicidal part. The common stressor in suicide is frustrated psychological need. That means how you are being frustrated, how you are being stressed, how you are being panicked. So those terminologies, what I have just mentioned, it has been consistent throughout your life, and it is haunting you at that particular point of an instance. So the concern is the common stressor in suicide is frustrated psychological needs. So it's the frustration which is a risk factor. Okay, what leads to frustration, that is also one such risk factor that needs to be analyzed, so we can get a proper clarity for that. Then afterwards, we have the fifth point, the fifth common approach, if I should say. It is basically the common emotions in suicide is hopeless and helpless. Every person commits a suicide, and what was his intent and mindset is that, my life is completely hopeless, my life is completely ridiculous, and the solution for that is, let's go and commit a suicide. But for that also, the person has to collect and has to gain certain guts for that. That is a very, very important thing that needs to be taken into consideration. So it's the emotions that also comes out, and we are not only analyzing the intent, but at the same point of time, we as a psychologist, we are also analyzing the emotional regulation of the deceased person. It's a very genuine and it's a very common thing. You can analyze the emotional regulation of the person who is alive, but what about the emotional regulation of the person who is dead? So it's the frustration. So again, you can see the fourth and the fifth approach is somehow interrelated to each other. It's the frustration which has been consistent throughout, and ultimately it leads to the emotions, and the result outcome was that, the person thought process and intent came into the existence, and he realized that, my life is completely hopeless and ridiculous. And the solution for that, you can just go and read the first point of this particular slide: suicide to seek a solution. Okay, so I hope the first 5 common approaches which was being proposed by SCHNEIDMAN is quite clear to you. So without further ado, let's move into the next approach. The common cognitive state in suicide is ambivalence. A decision that you make in your life. Committing a suicide is also one such decision that you are actually making in your life. Okay, you are committing a suicide. It is a decision that you have taken, and you are good to go to commit a suicide. But the thing is that, why? And this why needs to be answered in psychological scientific terms. It is the cognitive state. When we talk about, psychology itself has a different field. We have a child psychology, we have a clinical psychology, we have a neuropsychology, we have a human psychology, but we have one important factor and one important subfield of psychology is the cognitive state. While committing a suicide, what was the deceased thought process was? It's a situation that, you are supposed to focus more into the factor of the person's past life history. The past life history is very, very much important to take into consideration, because from past life history, you can just implement your own psychological skills and you can reach out to a certain predictive information or a solution towards it. And cognitive state is one such important factor that is quite associated with. So the common cognitive state in suicide is ambivalence. Now, ambivalence basically means the thought process of the person and the decisions that you have made, it's you are only being consistent throughout the decision. If you meet any a depressive person, your thought process will be, this person is always sounds depressive. When I met some person, I feel like that, he's sounding depressive, his life is completely hell or ridiculous. As a psychologist, I'm not supposed to judge anyone. That is what my ethics will come into the existence. The thing is that, I am a solution giver or a helper to an individual who is being affected psychologically. The thing is, ambivalence is that, when you make a decision of yourself that I'm going to commit a suicide, realizing that, my life is completely ridiculous, useless, hopeless, something like that. So it's the cognitive state also when the deceased, when the person who is committing a suicide, okay, what was his thought process at that particular point of an instance. Let me give you an example, and we all are familiar with most of the suicide cases. 99% we find a suicide note through handwriting. We have a field, we call it as a graphology. Through handwriting, what we can do is that we can identify a predictive behavioral pattern. So even this graphology can also be implemented in the field of psychology or forensic psychology also, or it can also be implemented in the field of cognitive state, because while you're writing, it's a simple thing. If a student is writing an answer, his cognitive state will come into the existence, his thought process will come into the existence. And in terms of that, then only the person is writing an answer, whatever the question has been asked in the question paper. You think, you answer. In terms of suicide, you think and you commit a suicide. So you can just relate with your own practical life, what you are being going through it. Okay. So while analyzing, it's, what police do, it's not any kind of an offense. I know there might be some sort of police officers, those who have joined, but still, what police do is that, they just consider as an evidence. Yes, it is an evidence, but itself, that particular evidence, behind that suicide note, there is one such psychological evidence that has been hidden. And that is we as a psychologist that we have to find it out. What was the strokes, alignments, everything, the words, whatever he has expressed in the suicide note, the deceased person, all of those things, the emotions, the thought process will come into the existence. So from there itself, you can get an idea, the cognitive process. Even there are some individuals who write a suicide note that I'm committing a suicide because of some reasons, and no one is responsible. Now that is a one such key word, that no one is responsible for this act, whatever I'm committing actually. Okay, so in terms of that, it's the cognitive state, it is very, very much important. And through a physical evidence, we can consider, a documented evidence, that is a suicide note, we can consider it from that particular prospect. Then the seventh approach is the common perceptual state in suicide in constriction, something which is stopping you. In India, especially, let's talk about the middle class family, you have to, restrict yourself, you have to restrict your desires, whatever the things you have. When I wasn't, I'll tell you about my personal thing. The thing was, when I was in ninth or 10th standard, I was very much fond of, to join the cricket academics and everything. And my father used to say that, we don't have such money, we are from middle class people and everything. So it's the thing is that, something which is being restricting from me and from my hobbies and everything. But it's not going to be, but it's the individual's decision that makes, how to seek to a particular solution. So I never thought about to, okay, something that has been restricted, so I'll commit a suicide. But nowadays, if you talk about in most of the middle class family and today's generation, the youth generation, how whenever certain kind of restrictions will come, either they will go impulsive, they will go aggressive, Or the secondary approach would be more or like they'll try to commit a suicide. Let's talk about the online gaming effect. How this online gaming effect has actually impacted the person's mental health. Because ultimately, till now, whatever the set of discussions we are having, it is concerning the keyword of mental health. So the thing is that, when you are trying to cover the process of cover the domain of mental health, if I should say, how it has been affected. Online gaming, how it is affecting individuals' mental health. I don't know how many of you are familiar that in one of the case of Delhi, a person, a child who was like 14 or 15 years age, he actually killed his own mother and father. He was playing PUBG. And the thing is that, mother and father were restricting them not to play online gaming, which is not creating a good impact on your mental health. They were trying to make them understand. But what happened was that, he tried his own parents. So how mentally the person is frustrated, first thing. Okay, so ultimately what is coming into the existence, it is the restriction. It is something which has been stopping. And when something that is restricting you, it leads to frustration and it leads to commit some wrongful act. Committing a suicide is also a what? It is a crime in forensics, what we call it, and it is a wrongful act. It can be at the same point of instance. So the common perceptual state in suicide is the constriction, what is actually being restricting you to fulfill your desires. If I talk about myself, I'll be very honest. My dream was, to opt forensics to get into the forensic science laboratory to work as a forensic expert. But till now, I haven't got that opportunity. So, every individual, they should acquire a plan B also. Like most of the faculties, if you ask the faculty members, the students who are working, the students who are in Centurion University, you can ask your faculty members, the forensic faculty, what was your first aim, and what was the reason you opted forensics. So the first reason, the first primary thing that will say that I wanted to be a forensic expert. Even the students over here, they ask me the same question. But the thing is that, we have a plan B. So never think that, plan A will always work. Always have an alternative plan at the same point of an instance. So ultimately, it is also one such form of a restriction that is also coming into the existence. But how you can tackle your own set of restrictions, making a alternative plan for that. Same thing goes with suicide. Same thing goes with a mentally frustrated person. Okay, this has not been happening. So let's opt for plan B. Now, there's a concept that has been proposed. You're not supposed to work hard. You're supposed to work smart. And plan B is suggesting that only. You have to work smart in that particular terms. The common action in suicide, the eighth approach, the common approach basically says about the common action in suicide is basically regression. Regretting all the times. Okay, whatever happened. Let it be, move on. And this is basically is happening in today's youth who are getting into a relationship. To be very honest, I have came across with many of the cases, even counsel them. And I have last week counseled one of the individual who was 14 years old kid. He was in a relationship. He was frustrated with his girlfriend. And what he said to me is that, sir, mujhe to hamesha regret wali feeling aati hai. The thing is that, at the age of 14, you are in a relationship. I look back my childhood days, I was stealing mangoes from someone else's home, to be very honest. That's what I was doing. I still remember my school days and everything. And he said me, his parents actually approached me that, sir, my son is being frustrated and, he has already said that, he'll commit a suicide and everything. So, even I was also, okay, let's counsel your child. Let's see what he is actually facing. And he legitimately said to me that I'm frustrated with my girlfriend. And I asked, what was the age of girlfriend? He was 14, his girlfriend was 16. So the thing is, you are in your school phase. You are supposed to make a decision that what you're going to take in your 12th, in your 10+2, because that is a very much important decision of your life. That is what you're going to take. And what these people are doing, they are getting into a relationship and they are being regretted, they are being frustrated. So it sounds quite funny, but at the same point of time it even sounds quite serious, because parents were frustrated. They have a concern that what if his son will commit something wrongful act. So the thing is that regret, okay, every person has a regret in his life. See, each and every one of us has come across many problems in our life. Okay, it's not going to be every individual has a happily life or consistent life. But the thing is that you will face certain situation, you will face certain ups and downs in life. Rather than regretting that, seek a solution to it. Go and talk to them, go and talk to a counselor, or if you can counsel yourself, it's a better thing. So the thing is that regression needs to be excluded from your life. Although what we are discussing about, it is the suicide, which is a major risk factor, which has to be analyzed on a very first prior basis. But ultimately there are subdomains that comes under the sub risk factors that also comes under your suicidal part, and that is what a regression is all about. So the common action in suicide is what? It is the regret. Even a regret is a one such sub risk factor or a risk factor that we as a psychologist should be analyzing it. Then the interpersonal act in suicide is the communication of intention. So again, the communication of intention, and if you see the 6th point of this particular slide, it is relatable to each other. So the communication of intention would be simplified in a suicide note. Even if the person is writing that that whatever the I'm committing suicide because it's my decision, okay, no one is responsible for that. So even it has a communication hidden over there, and the intention is also been hidden over there. Okay, then the last approach, the common consistency in suicide is basically lifelong coping patterns. How you cope up with your life. Okay, are you being able to consistent? Are you being able or to show the consistency that you can cope up whatever the set of problems or the a serious problematic situations that you are facing, and how you're going to deal with it. So it's the individual's own cognitive state also, how you're going to deal the current situation of your life. Okay, so these were the 10 common approaches that was been proposed by SCHNEIDMAN. Okay, reason, coming back to the previous slide, so it was a risk factor, and the risk factor over here is basically suicide. Homicide is a risk factor, yes, we can consider, but if you talk about autopsy from a psychological perspective, it is the suicide which is our first prior basis. So I hope each and every pointers has been cleared. Okay, and if you have any questions, so you can ask me for the same, no issues with that. But other than the common 10 approaches, there are certain factors that needs to be mentioned in the psychological autopsy report, not autopsy report, psychological autopsy report. Okay, so there are certain factors that needs to be examined in that needs to be examined in psychological autopsy is basically the drug and the alcohol abuse history. That's what I have talked about, the case that I have handled in the month of January. Okay, so the thing is whether that person was drug addicted. So whatever the set of factors that what we are going to examine, we are going to examine with respect to the deceased person, the person who is already dead. So alcohol and drug abuse history. Okay, whether the person was addicted to alcohol, whether he was been under the influence of any such kind of drugs or not, first thing. Okay, then afterwards comes the suicide note. For police, it is a evidence. For us, it is a psychological evidence, and over there, the person's cognitive state, the individual's intentions is actually being hidden. A graphologist, see, forensics is a complete combined set of things, and every individual should contribute in that. Suicide note, a graphologist can be a one such major contributor in that. Behind the psychology, a psychologist can be a one such contributor in that. So we have a suicide note, we have a graphologist expert, we have a psychologist expert in these two particular terms. Then a status of relationship in day prior to death. That means what was the relationship status of that person before he committed a suicide or before he was found to be dead. Then afterwards comes the marital assessment. What I was doing was basically the love story kind of an assessment, to be very honest. The person who was 14 years old age group. Marital assessments, some kind of a dispute that goes on between husband and wife, which is a very common thing in our country, and it is a very global problem, I guess. Okay, so we have a counselor for that also. Okay, for marital assessments, whatever the things. So the deceased marriage life, what it was, whether he was being frustrated with his marital status, how was his relationship with his the husband and wife, and everything. Okay, so ultimately the factors, it is covering what? The background history of that individual, a pre-suicidal behaviors, something you try to commit a suicide, you give an indications also that you will commit a suicide, or even before that you have committed a suicide, but you are not succeeded. One of my friend, he's also a counselor. He was actually dealing with one of his client, and what he saw was that he told me that this person has tried to commit suicide 6 times, and in those 6 times he wasn't been able to succeed. He tried to burn himself, he failed. He tries to hang himself, he failed. He tries to cut the nerves, jisko hum bolte hain nas kaatna, he failed. So there were like 6 different approaches. Although now that person is living a very normal life as if for now. So the thing is that it's the indications also that needs to be analyzed. The deceased person, whether he has tried to commit a suicide and what was his intention behind it to commit a suicide. So that also needs to be taken into consideration. Medical history. Even there are certain persons who are being frustrated with their medical issues, that they are not being able to recover from their health and everything. And ultimately, if health has been affected, your mental health will affect, frustration will be there, and the proper seeking solution is a suicide. So a medical history also one such part. Pre-death mental state. Okay, let's talk about Sushant Singh Rajput. As if for now from the media, what we have got, that whatever the information that we received, that he has committed a suicide. He has committed a suicide because he was being frustrated mentally and everything, in professional terms and everything. Okay, so a pre-death mental state means that what was the mental state of the person before he committed a suicide. Psychological history, the depression or any other depression, frustration, anxiety, stress. These are the 4 major factors that every psychologist covers in order to examine the psychological autopsy session, and the psychological history is a one such concern. Then it is to be followed by the death history of the person, death history of family. What if in case if you are being very much close to your family members, and all of a sudden that family member is no longer in this world, how it has been affected you mentally. Okay, and from that particular terms, how it was been affected you mentally, and what you made a decision, okay, now this person is no longer in my life, let's commit a suicide. Okay, so that is also one such approach that can be taken into an account for the analysis part. So every factor is a risk factor. You are analyzing those risk factor. Even behind that risk factor, it has an intent that is actually being hidden over there. Then a family, employment, and the educational history. Okay, so employment status, you're not been getting a satisfactory salary, whatever the experience, the job role that you're getting, and the kind of work that you're getting, and with respect to that, you're not being able to get a satisfactory salary. Okay, educational history basically is basically it is for the students, for the youth who are being into the educational setup and not being able to succeed whatever the whatever the goals that they have made for their career. Okay, so ultimately it is leading what? It is ultimately leading a frustration. Family employment, not getting a proper satisfactory job, your pay scale is not that much sufficient to fulfill the needs of the family. Specifically, let's talk about the middle class people. All of us, like most of us, are from middle class family. The thing is that whatever the set of jobs we are getting, are we able to fulfill the needs of our family members? The answer will be no. But that doesn't mean that you will commit something wrongfully in your life. And that doesn't matter actually. Same thing goes with educational history. Okay, whether this person, let's talk about the person 10+2 person who is preparing for their IIT, JEE and their NEET exams, especially for the general category students, who have been continuously preparing for their exam, and because of this they are not being able to get a seat in the medical colleges or any top reputed engineering college for that. So the thing is that altogether it is the frustration that has been coming out. If you are frustrated, let me give you a very simple solution towards it. If you are angry, if you're frustrated, have a nap, a short nap of half an hour, go and sleep. Okay, and even if you're then frustrated afterwards, then go to a psychologist, counsel yourself. That is the best way that you can do it, rather than seeing the ceiling fan and searching for a rope is not the solution, to be very honest. Okay, rather than you can go with these two approaches from that particular concern, and you can take a solution out of it on a positive side. So these are the that needs to be examined by you as a psychologist professional while conducting the session of psychological autopsy. Now, what are the salient features of psychological autopsy? So the first one, it says basically the comprehensive retrospective post-mortem investigation. But this post-mortem investigation is basically telling you about with respect to the mental health part. Okay, so a comprehensive respective mental health post-mortem investigation that needs to be assessed, because as I said in the very beginning of the slide, psychology, that means whatever you are implementing, skills that you are implementing on it, it is the assessment that you are actually carrying it out. If you're finding the IQ level of the person, what you are actually doing it, you are proposing a assessment tool and then you are able to evaluate it. So it's the assessment and then it is to be followed by the evaluation. In terms of post-mortem, it is the physical assessment and then giving a result. From psychological autopsy, it is the mental assessment and giving you the evaluation report for that. So a post-mortem investigation, which is assessing the information related to what the actual intention of the deceased. Now, from this particular point, you can find out the intention of the deceased, because everything has a past life history, intention, frustration, desperation, depression, stress, anxiety, everything will cover in each and every factors that has been mentioned over there is the factor that needs to be examined in psychological autopsy part. Okay, just a minute. So that is the first salient feature for the post-mortem investigation in psychological autopsy. So ultimately, what is the goal? You're actually finding out the intention, the actual intention of the deceased. So intention needs to be rectified and needs to be clarified from your end. Okay. Then afterwards, information is collected from the available death, care, and the psychiatric records, other documents, and forensic examination. Going back to the past life history, whether that person was seeking certain medical attentions, whether that person was seeking certain antidepressant medications or something like that, whether that person do acquire certain psychiatric or psychological records, also history. Let's talk about any documented things. Most of the person, they do have a habit of writing a diary. So something written documents can be recovered. And forensic examination. So how the forensic examination was been conducted, how the autopsy, I'm talking about autopsy as of for now, autopsy session was been conducted, everything you can get it. See, as a forensic psychologist, what is your main intent? As much information that you can retrieve or you can get it. The more you get the information, the more you reach to a certain specific conclusion. The ultimate goal is that what will be your analytical approach with respect to the information that has been presented in front of you. The risk factor that's what I'm talking about. Okay. Then afterwards, it is to be followed by psychological autopsy studies mostly uses cases control design, having been better able to estimate the role of various risk factors of suicide. So basically, case control design, basically what they actually says is that, till now, you as an expert, the psychologist expert, whatever the previous case history that you have covered and the current case study that you are actually dealing, make a comparative study out of it. And in terms of that, give a relatable solution towards it. Because ultimately what we are actually focusing on, the prior aspect of the risk factors. And the risk factor is a one such common approach, which has to be analyzed on first prior basis. Again, I said, all these are what? These are the risk factors. I rather than should write the risk factors to examine in psychological autopsy. Okay. So these are the 4 common salient features of psychological autopsy are. It has to be covered. Okay. The ultimate goal is that, you are reaching towards a specific conclusion, assessing the mental health related goals. First thing, information related. Okay. Whatever the information that you can seek out, that you can get, that you can retrieve, everything. So everything has to be analyzed on a very scientific terms and psychological terms also. Now, these are some of the pointers that I have mentioned that actually indicates, and this is a small task. It is for the participants. Let's see how many of you can answer it. Okay. So these are some of the pointers that I have mentioned that indicates the intent to die. That means these are the certain signs that, the person has the actual intent to be found to be committing a suicide, let's say. Special preparation to death. If you're committing a suicide, it needs a special preparation, specifically the mental preparation. Okay. So can we say that, yes, it is an intent towards the death? I think so. Yes, we can say that. Previous suicide attempts or threat. Let's go back to this particular slide that is talking about the pre-suicidal behavior. Ultimately, so previous suicide attempts had whether this deceased person already has attempted the previous committing a suicide or something like that. If you talk about Sushant Singh Rajput, it wasn't been found any such kind of this thing, the previous suicide attempts or threats. He was being frustrated on professional terms. Recent stressful event or loss, any kind of stress. If you talk about myself, when Vilas sir told me that, you have to give a webinar and expert talk, could you able to give that? I was like, okay, I'll give, but at the same point of time, even I was also in stress, because he generally said that, there will be the higher authorities from the University of Centurion will be there. So it's a stress in professional terms, which arises very naturally. It is an opportunity for me, which is giving a positive side, but at the same point of time, I was in a stress. Now I'm not, I'm in a complete relaxed zone now. Okay. So it is an opportunity. It was creating a stress. But the thing is that, the intention was that, how would I deliver a lecture? whether my content will make the participant understand the topic which is very new to each and every one of you. So that is a different thing. Recent stressful, that means whether that stress factor is been consistent throughout your life. Is it haunting you consistently? Or loses means basically you lose something, you go into the frustration, you go into the zone of stress. When you lose your family member, you are in a zone of depression, you are in a zone of stress. Okay, then followed by serious depression or mental disorder. So ultimately, the cycle comes back to the same one factor. It is the mental health. Ultimately, see, today's, even if this is 2022, we are living in 21st century, but still the mindset is nobody wants to talk about mental health, because the mindset is that, you know, if I'll talk about my mental health, people will consider me as a maniac person. जिसको बोलते हैं हिंदी में लोग मेरे को पागल समझेंगे या दुनिया मुझे पागल बोलेगी. It's not a shame to talk about mental health. It's when you are mentally fit, everything will go fine, to be very honest. Okay, then great emotional or physical pain. So if you look into these factors, the pointers that I have mentioned in the slide, yes, it is making certain specific intent towards it. Talking about the last point that has been mentioned, that is the great emotional or physical pain. So basically it is ultimating, signifying how you are being emotionally affected with a specific traumatic incident. If you lose someone who is very much close to you, how you are being affected mentally, how you are being affected psychologically. Physical pain effect is a different meaning to it. How your emotions were been coming out. So everything has a meaning towards it. And yes, they actually give you the specific indicators to make the person the intention. Because what us as a psychologist expert are finding it out, the intention behind the death of the person. And these are the major pointers that what we are supposed to look into consideration. So yes, the above mentioned factor, it actually does indicate the intent at the time of death. So it can be any one of these in this particular point. Okay. So this is just a numerical, just a summary of what the psychological mental health disorders are and what was the reason the person is been committing suicides and how it is relatable to psychological autopsy. So prevalence of mental disorder.
Pravesh, sir, are you there? Students, are you able to hear sir's voice?
No, sir.
Okay. I think there's a technical issue. Yeah, Pravesh, sir.
Okay, am I audible?
Yes, you're audible. Please go
Sorry,
ahead.
there was a bit of, yeah, there was a technical glitch,
Okay.
I guess.
Yeah.
Just a minute, I'll just share my screen.
Yes.
I hope it is visible.
Yes, it is visible. Go ahead, please.
Okay, sorry for the inconvenience. Yeah, so depressive disorder, it is nothing new for each and every one of us. The person was depressed and he commits a suicide. Bipolar disorder, you know, it is something, a person which has one person, two different personality. Okay, and you need to analyze if the person who has a psychological history and he was been diagnosed with a bipolar disorder, so you should consult to a psychiatrist whosoever he was being counseling with. Let's say if I have committed a suicide and I was been diagnosed with a bipolar disorder, so you as a forensic expert, you will go to a psychiatrist, ask that person that, you know, what were the things that you have examined, you have analyzed. Now this person has committed a suicide. Okay. Schizophrenia, something living in a world of reality. You know, there's a concept. We are aware about the unicorn horse, but in reality, it is not. So it's like more like a hallucination. You are living in a world of reality. I'm just giving you a very simple, basic explanation about what about schizophrenia is. But if you deal in clinical terms about schizophrenia, it has a very deep and, you know, something completely different meaning to it. Simple terms, schizophrenia, living in a world of reality, but you're not accepting that. You're something accepting which is not even been existed. A classic example is a unicorn horse. I used to give, I make my students to understand about what schizophrenia is. So this is how we can relate to it. Not accepting the world, the world of reality, you are accepting some other world, and you are considering that as a realistic thing. Okay, so from that particular person, now let's talk about from the schizophrenic perspective. You are not being intact with the world of reality. You are being intact with something else kind of a world which is not to be acceptable, first of all. Okay, but that non-acceptable world, how it is impacting you mentally, that is a very first, you know, thing which has a meaning to it. Is it impacting your mental health on a negative terms or on a positive terms? Okay, and even if it is affecting you on a positive terms, even that is also needs to be analyzed. So if it is affecting you on a negative side, so ultimately there will be a certain risk factors that is going to be associated with it. There was a game, no, the online gaming of Pokemon. It was a complete virtualistic kind of a world. Was it there in reality any such kind of a Pokemon? No. Some or the other way, okay, the gaming disorders, little bit of schizophrenic content or the trait was actually being mentioned. So it's more like the examples, the unicorn horse example, the Pokemon online gaming is a one such classic example that needs to be covered over there. Alcoholic dependence, drug abuse, that has already been discussed. Okay, so the background history is of one such concern, and the personality disorder. See, how you behave, it indicates what kind of a personality you have. First thing. Now, personality disorder means that, you know, whether your personality is being deviated from your normal social life. See, all of us use social media account. If I'm meeting a person face to face, he is that one person who is very genuine, who is very good, cool and calm, very a positive vibes. When I meet a person, some person, it gives me a positive vibe. But what if in case if the same person, I visited his social media profile, it has a different world to it. That is a different meaning. Personality disorder is basically talking about the deviation from the individual's normal social life, and that deviation is affecting in what side, whether it is been approaching on a positive side or on a negative side. So that is what the first prior concern needs to be taken into an account. Okay, so these are certain and the very common and a very serious mental disorders which has been mentioned over there. Okay, where we can conduct the psychological autopsy studies as well at the same point of instance. Just a minute. Okay, so this is a task, although I have you know, within 1 hour I have a meeting to attend, but still I'll explain you the every content of this particular slide. I have made a scenario. Let's consider as a drowning death. Okay. And the cause of death has already been mentioned. Asphyxia due to water in lungs. I know each and every one of you has been aware about asphyxia. Okay. If not, so you can ask me for the same if possible. Now, the cause of death has been mentioned, but the manner of death is quite unclear. So there are three possibilities. So let me give you the let me give you the explanation of each and every possibility. So if it is an accidental case, okay, so for accidental, the question arises, did the victim struggle and drown? So there will be the sign of struggles on the body that will be seen on the victim's dead body, first thing, of the deceased person. Did victim enter the pool with intention of drowning? So if that intention of drowning is been specified, we won't be seeing any such kind of these the struggling signs and everything. It was his intention and the person committed a suicide in terms of that. Followed by, was the victim held underwater until the drowning occurred? So there will be the sign of struggles and everything. There might be some sort of injury marks if the case is a homicide. So you can relate each and every forms. The thing is that if it is a suicide, in there itself, the psychological autopsy give you the major role for that. First thing, in terms of accidental, okay, you know, someone has an intention ki chalo, let's kill that person and we'll make a scenario of suicide. Okay, so it can be in accidental and homicidal. It is more or like a 50-50 precise part that the psychological autopsy session is not to be implemented on that particular prospect. So for suicidal part, the psychological autopsy, because what is the ultimate goal of the psychological autopsy session is finding the intent of the deceased. Intent is drowning, but what about the mental intent of that person? So that mental intent of the person can't be explained in accidental and homicidal, but it can be explainable in suicidal. Okay, so this was a one such scenario that needs to be taken into an account. There are some cases, although I have mentioned two, but there are many like on prior basis, only 3 of the famous cases that has been registered. I'll name them. First, it is the Sushant Singh Rajput case, okay, which held in the year of 14th of June 2020. Okay, so from the sources, from the media, whatever the information that we have got, he was been frustrated mentally, okay, in his professional lives and everything, and because of that he committed a suicide. But we all are aware about the investigation procedure, how it was been conducted. We were supposed to find out, the investigating team was supposed to find out the intention and everything, whatever the set of cases or whatever the set of scenario was in Sushant Singh Rajput case. But ultimately they were focusing on the drug peddlers and everything. Okay. But yes, in reality, the psychological autopsy session was been conducted on Sushant Singh Rajput. What were the things that were being taken into an account? His background history, the lifestyle of Sushant Singh Rajput when he was not an actor. But when he was not an actor, coming into a film industry, again, his lifestyle was being examined. Whether he was under certain medications, whether he was genuinely psychological ill or not, mentally ill or not, that what we can say that, okay, was he consulting to any of the psychiatrists, whether he was going for a counseling sessions and everything. And from a forensic experts and from the autopsy part, the injuries, the patterns were also been examined at that particular point of an instance. But psychological autopsy, it was going back to his background, life history, how his relationship status was with Riya Chakravarti, that was also being taken into consideration. We talked about the marital assessments. Okay, so as of for now, let's not talk about the marital assessment, but what was the relationship status of Sushant Singh Rajput was with Riya Chakravarti. Okay. Then afterwards, the second famous case is all about the Burari murder case. Okay, Yes, it sounds homicidal, but still there was the psychological autopsy session was being conducted in all the family members of this particular case. So basically the case was more or like, there was a priest and everything who has given them a fake spiritual hope, okay, giving them a hope that, you commit a suicide and one of your family members will come and save you and everything, but it was not the reality. Okay, they did whatever the priest has informed them, whatever the priest has ordered them, ultimately conducting a psychological autopsy session on them, basically make them, sorry, the outcome was that, they were quite, the family was quite spiritual belief and everything, and the priest has taken a very good advantage out of it. Okay, so how that spiritual belief has affected mentally, although they have an intention that, the positive side has been there for those family members, but the outcome was a complete different result as well. Then again, the case, although I haven't mentioned it over here, but Sunanda Pushkar case is also one such famous case where the psychological autopsy session was being conducted. As of for now, the case is still being unsolved. Okay, Burari murder case, yes, to some extent the psychological autopsy session was being conducted. It is solved to some extent. The outcome is also been there. Sunanda Pushkar case and Sushant Singh Rajput is actually a mystery behind it, although the psychological autopsy sessions were being conducted. So psychological autopsy sessions you have conducted, so you have got a prior information about the individual past life history, the intent and everything. So yes, in India, there are some cases where the psychological autopsy is actually being used. And if you talk about what is the perspective of psychological autopsy, so it is a future of the investigative psychology. Okay. So as I said, it is the future of the investigative psychology. So what will be its futuristic approach in terms of the investigation process? So the future of psychological autopsy, the studies can be more focused on the interaction between the risk factors. We discussed about the 10 common approaches about the risk factors, what actually these are. Okay, so how these risk factors are interrelatable to each other, how this interrelated risk factor needs to be analyzed, each and every set of domains needs to be taken into an account. Focused on some specific suicide population of major interest for suicide prevention. Now, if you talk about this suicide population, so I think the depressive disorder followed by alcoholic dependence and the abusive population, that will come at the topmost level, because these are the two major primary reasons behind, okay, the person is committing a suicide for that particular purpose. Okay, so suicide risk factor, and the second last line you can see over there, the prevention. So risk factor, you analyzed those risk factors, you have given to a certain seeking solution towards it, and what are the preventive measures that you can implement it over there. Then afterwards, it is to be followed by the combined psychological autopsy methodology with the biological measurements. Basically, biological measurements, they are actually talking about the medical approaches, the medical history of the person. Specifically, you're not going to rely on only the psychological autopsy part, but also the details that you can get from the post-mortem sessions that was been conducted by the medical examiner. From post-mortem, what I said, you can just get the how the person is found to be dead. But from psychological autopsy, you can find the person, why this person was found to be dead. What was the reason, the intent that can be analyzed. So this is the first and the foremost basic and a major futuristic approach of psychological autopsy. But before concluding this session, if you talk about the court admissibility, it has been proposed. Okay, the proposal has already been made in Supreme Court that whether we should conduct these psychological autopsy sessions and brings to in the forensic settings or not. So it is more or like a work in progress. The topic of the session was psychological autopsy, a futuristic approach. So from that particular intent, that signifies the legal and the court admissibility of the psychological autopsy part as well. So yes, it is a futuristic approach in the investigative psychological domain as well. So this is it from my end, and these were some references from where I have tried to make a content out of it. So that's it from my end. So I hope you enjoyed the session of psychological autopsy and its investigative approach. So any questions, any queries? So we can proceed further.
Yeah, student, now the session is open for question answer. If you have any kind of question, you can directly unmute yourself and you can ask, or else you can type your question in chat box also. Okay, let me start with one question. Yeah, so the question is, as per your opinion, what are the limitation of psychological autopsy? Limitations.
Okay. From the evidential perspective, if you talk about the limitations perspective, if the psychological autopsy approach will be implemented in the forensic settings, so it will be considered as a corroborative evidence. Because if you talk about from a psychological, from the forensic psychological prospect, most of the techniques that what we use is basically considered as a corroborative evidence. So that is a one such limitations which actually, pinpointing towards the court admissibility and under which category of evidence that you're going to put. So that is one such limitations that we can put forward into it.
Okay, thank you. Students, any other question you have? Faculties?
What is the main difference between the psychology report and psychology autopsy report? Is there any difference between
Yes, it is a difference. Basically, when you talk about the the autopsy report, so basically the demographic details of the person and everything has been mentioned over there, and everything, and name of the person, sex, and the age and everything, followed by the injuries that has happened, on which specific area the injury has occurred, what was the pattern of the injury, what was the possible weapons and everything. So each and everything has to be mentioned in a very detailed and a very descriptive manner. But in psychological autopsy, same thing goes, the demographic details, but the thing is individual's mental health. As I said in this particular slide, is my slide visible?
It's visible. But go to the presentation.
Okay.
Go to the presentation.
Okay, just give me a minute.
Yeah,
what we are supposed to identify in the psychological autopsy report are these factors. As I said, in psychological autopsy, these are the factors, or majorly, if I should say, these are the risk factors that needs to be examined. So these are the certain pointers that is been mentioned in the psychological autopsy report, and that needs to be assessed. Plus, whatever you are assessing the risk factors, okay, what solutions that you are actually mentioning it up in the report as well, that is the first thing that needs to be taken into consideration. So that is the difference
report, sir, we will include along with this any other extra factors, sir?
Yes, if you're talking about from a normal psychological report, so what you do is that you conduct a test, okay? So the scoring part, the interpretation parts and everything. We are not supposed to conduct any such kind of a psychological test because the person is already dead. The mental state of the person is dead. But the thing is that, going back to the past life history of the person, examining it, getting the information as much as we can do that. In normal psychological report, demographic details followed by which test you have conducted, followed by the scores, the outcomes, and what will be your suggestions regarding his behavior and the personality pattern. So this is a difference.
Thank you, sir. Thank you.
Students, any question? Yeah, one more question. So what are the recent advancements in the forensic psychological research? So what is going on now?
Apart from psychological autopsy, if I should say.
Yeah, anything, sir, anything. What is
Yeah.
the current status?
So yeah, okay. So basically now we have a tool which is called it as STS, which stands for Suspect Detection System. Like we all know about polygraphy, which measures the physiological responses. Okay. But now what we have is basically suspect detection system, which basically focus on one physiological response, that is the galvanic skin response, which determines the rate of sweat. So determining the rate of sweat, examining the physical response is basically considered, is what we called it as an SDS, the suspect detection system. One more we have is the eye tracking system. Okay. So in that particular system, what we are actually doing is we are just interviewing the person. We are just having a normal conversation with the person. And in terms of that, there is a finding that is a recent advancement that has come into the forensic psychology investigation setup. When a person is communicating with you, if the person is telling you a lie, the pupil will dilate at a in a very extensive mode. So the pupil dilation, what it is actually suggesting that, it is giving you the indication that the person is telling you a lie. No matter if the person is communicating with you on a very normal way, although he's telling a lie, but there will be some sort of pupil dilation. It is basically a technique which is work in progress. Okay. Very few research has been implemented on those techniques. We are focusing more onto it. We'll see what will be the outcome of that. So these are the two newly based technique that has been proposed in the forensic psychology investigation.
Okay, you mean these techniques are not being used in investigation as of now?
From the academics perspective, it has been used. Most of the students are also conducting a research. Okay, a few of them I have met also. They are, doing a research work in this. So as if for now, from the legal prospect and the, handling case related part, we haven't come across it. It's a work in progress. It is still in the academic section.
Okay. So you mentioned about suspect detection system. So you said only GSR, galvanic skin response, is the only one. So
is the only physiological parameter.
Acha, so actually this particular parameter is already there in the lie detection technique.
It is already been there, but the thing is that, it in the lie detection system, it is more or like they are focusing the galvanic skin response, but other than that, they are also focusing on the rate of respiration, heart rate, oxygen levels, and everything. What suspect detection system has done is that, he has taken only one physiological response from that, and from that particular concern, whenever it is a very naturalistic thing. When you are telling a lie, when you are in a state of stress, the more sweat comes around your body part. So that is of most preferable physiological parameters that has been taken into an account, and with that respect, the system has actually been proposed. That's why I said, these two are in terms of academics. We haven't used in terms of the investigation. Let's see what will be the outcome of that.
Thank you. Students, if you have any question, please ask. Other faculties also requested to ask questions if you have anything. Student, the session is open for question and answer. Professor, please go to the chat box. One question is there.
Okay. So one question is: a day after the suicide, the person is okay and well, and suddenly that person hanged himself. Why, sir? So ultimately, that is the answer to that question would come into the existence is basically the intent. What if in case I am carrying a very positive vibes with myself and everything. Okay, I am on a very positive mood and everything, delivering a talk on psychological autopsy, and on the next day I commit a suicide. So in between those time interval, what has happened, that needs to be examined, and what has happened with respect to that, what was the intent that the person has taken a decision to commit a suicide. So that time duration should be there. All of a sudden, your mood changes, everything changes. Okay, most of the cases we may come across yesterday or day before yesterday or month before, he was very okay, he was very normal, cool and calm person. What triggers that person? No one knows that. So what is that triggering factor which needs to be analyzed from our end as a forensic expert in terms of psychological autopsy session. So it's the triggering factor that needs to be analyzed.
Yeah. Any other things?
Family history also playing any role, sir? Yes, it actually plays a vital role, because in the very initial phase of your life, it is one saying that your parents are your first teachers. How your parents are giving you the best knowledge, what the things that they are actually suggesting you, that is a different thing. That is the first prior basic thing. But other than that, how your relationship status of your family is. That is what a relationship status is all about. It's not about the love story part. It's all about the relationship status of your family members, how it is, how the environment of your family is, how that environment is affecting you on a very positive side or a very negative side. So that is also a very much important and a vital role to play that needs to be considered in psychological autopsy.
Any other questions, students? Sir, okay. So, would you like to give any tips to our students in order to?
One more question.
Okay, fine. We'll go with that first.
Okay, you said that how to give any tip, how to give, giving a tips. So one question has been aroused, and it is related to tips actually. How to handle stress? Okay.
I think, sir, there is sub question from the first question. I think.
Okay. Yes, sir. But that person, if yes, sir, but that person, if set in his mind that I have to commit a suicide continuously, and the family members would help him to overcome on this thing, yes, it can be, if the person is able to share the problems, whatever it has, whatever the problem they are facing it up. So yes, it can be a possible factor. The more you share, it will release the stress and everything. Okay. Now the question is how to handle stress. See, overthinking leads to stress, to be very honest. Okay. If you talk about myself, Vilas, just now I told, sir told me to give an expert talk on psychological autopsy. I was in stress, to be very honest. The thing is that, don't think that too much. All of us know who is Mahendra Singh Dhoni. He is considered as a captain, cool and everything. He said in his interview that, don't worry about the results. Just give your best. And once you are done with your performance, okay, let's see what will be the result, but don't think on that too much. When we are in our 10th boards, on 12th boards, what we used to do, okay, we are done with the paper. Now 10 days or 15 days are left, and we start thinking what will be the marks that we are going to score. Okay, so that thinking process, it is not even a thinking, that is a overthinking aspect that is making a person stressful. So that overthinking part needs to be nullified at that particular point of time. So this is how you can cope up with your stress.
Yeah. Any other questions?
As far as tips are
one more question.
Sure. Sir, can we go for psychological autopsy in any kinds of death? Most preferably, you can go with a suicide. That is the first prior thing, plus a homicide. Okay, so from that particular concern, these are the two kinds of death where we can implement the psychological autopsy as well. Okay, it can be a possibility, a person who is psychologically frustrated and everything, and the other person who is a perpetrator, he'll make a scenario out of it and he'll hang that person, making the scenario that person has committed a suicide. Although it is a homicide, but that is a suicide. So over there, the physical examination, the autopsy part will came into the existence as well. Okay.
Yeah. Any other questions, students? Okay, sir. Fine. Would you like to give any tips to our students in order to keep their first step into the domain of forensic psychology?
Okay.
What are the job perspective for them after forensic psychology?
Job perspective from forensic psychology. So first thing is that, if you are being interested in psychology, in forensic psychology or any other field of psychology, okay, there is one more question. I'll answer to that as well. Okay. So basically, if your university is, if your university has having a subject of forensic psychology, it's a good thing. But I'll preferably suggest you to go for one book of psychology. You can refer to any book of psychology. You can just simply Google it up, a book for psychology. Okay. So from that particular concerns, first get the ultimate clearance, basics, what psychology is, and you can easily relate it to in forensics part. Okay. Second thing, it is a field. I'm not saying only forensic psychology, any field of forensics which asks for these skills, the practical knowledge and the practical skills approach. Even how you talk to a person, it is a very practical skill part. It is a challenge for you. When I used to counsel, it's not going to be like I'll talk to the client in a very rude way. No, it's not going to be like that. Your counseling skills is very, very much important. How your communications are and how you make a rapport formation with your client is also very, very much important. So it's the skills will makes the person a good psychological counselor, and you can implement those skills in the forensic settings. Okay. From a job perspective, if I'm talking about, now we have, the thing is, in forensic psychology, there is the upcoming techniques that are coming. Just now, what I have discussed about the SDS and the eye tracking system. And apart from that, from a job perspective, the very first thing is they ask, every organization asks, have you done any kind of a research work? Have you done any such kind of a research work in this particular field of specialization or not? When I was being recruited in this particular organization, the very first thing is that they didn't even ask me, tell me about yourself. They simply asked me, is there any kind of a research work you have it or not? So if you really wanted to go into the jobs of forensics, forensic psychology, any field of forensics, the first thing is research. Research, without research, they are not even asking you. Research and how you are practically skillful. So these are the two approaches that you are supposed to go with it. Okay. And I'm very much aware, and I'm in contact with a few of the faculties members of Centurion University, specifically Vilas sir. So we used to have a conversation also, because whatever the skills these colleges are providing, it is genuinely good. So they'll help you out. The faculties over there will help you out on a very better note. Okay. What we used to say to our students is 60-40 ratio. That means 60% approach of practicals and 40% of the theory. So the main intention is more like making a students practically skillful. First thing. So this is a suggestion from my end. Okay, a question.
Yeah, one more.
So sorry, one question. Yeah. I'll just answer to that.
Vilas,
Yes, sir.
I had a little bit of query, not of course query. Pravesh sir, very happy to observe all of your feelings, particularly in psychology. I would like to ask you one point, sir. If we can go for what we call group families, once again, I don't think this kind of psychological issues may come, sir. In this regard, I would like to ask your valuable opinion, sir.
In terms of
Encouraging group culture, sir.
Encouraging group. Is that what you're asking, sir? I guess.
Acharya sir, could you please repeat once again?
Vilas, am I clear?
No, sir. Please repeat once again. Acharya sir.
I guess he asked about the group emerging part, I guess, if I'm not wrong.
I didn't get that. Acharya sir, are you there? Acharya sir, meanwhile, you can answer the question which is there in the chat box.
Sure. So sorry, one question, that suicide is a specific age like teenagers. They are suffering depressions and something, but the age person like 50 to 60 years person, why they commit a suicide. It's a genuine thing. It's the professional lifestyle and the family culture, the family environment. And because of that, you talk about farmers. You know, last month I read a newspaper, a 55-year-old farmer, he committed a suicide. Because of that, he has taken a huge amount of loan and he was not being able to repay that. And because of that, the frustration has led into committing a suicide. So committing a suicide, now most preferably it is the teenagers who are, you know, giving more importance to that. It's not going to be like that when the old age persons are being left behind. Even we have cases also that, you know, where the person has genuinely committed a suicide. A farmer, a 55-old-year farmer has done that. Okay. And age and suicide have a specific age or not? No, it does not have any such kind of a specific age. It's the scenario that makes you to take certain decisions of your life. Okay, so not a specific age for that.
I think one more question is there. What is the
Sir,
basic
what is
step?
a basic step to counsel a serial killer as a psychologist? So basically, the first thing is that serial killers or a psychopath, they are the very good manipulators. First thing. Apart from that, you know, you have to be a next level manipulators to that particular individuals. First, that is a basic step. The thing is, when you counsel a serial killer, there are chances, 90% of the chances they will be in the frustration zone. There will be their behavioral parameters pattern would be more or like impulsive, aggressive, and everything. So from that particular part, you have to stick to your ethics. You have to stick to your norms and regulations. You don't have to nullify your frustration. You have to be in a zone of coolness and calmness. The thing is that, you know, while you counsel a serial killer, always target the past background history of that person. Because the more you target the past life history of that person, the more information you can get from there. So that is one such possibility. And counseling, the basic step is a rapport formation. No matter if the person is giving you any kind of nuisance words or delivering any such kind of a nuisance word, but you have to stick to your norms. You have to counsel them, help them out, and rehab them. Rehabilitation. Is there any biological research study on forensic psychology cases? Basically, if you talk about from biological perspectives, we have a genetics and psychology. And it is telling you how genetics is also been influencing the serial killer traits and everything, and what are the criminal behavioral tendencies also. So yes, we do have certain research in terms of genetics, okay, plus from the neurological parts also, we do have certain research which is implementing forensic psychology at the same point of instance. If I'm talking about from the neuro perspective, neurological parts, the prefrontal cortex is the one such preferable regions of the brain which is considered the most at the research perspective, because it's a thought process that is coming into the existence. And that is what we have already discussed. And that is what we have discussed in this particular session of psychological autopsy.
Yeah. Yes, Acharya sir, are you there? Acharya sir. Acharya sir, are you there?
I can just recollect what sir has asked. He has asked related to group related part. So just a short answer to that. You know, a group discussion is something which is completely an individualistic perspective. Okay. The thing is that whether the person wants to discuss his or her problems in a group or not, that is what we are supposed to take into consideration. Group emerging is more or like, it is more or like a therapeutic approach. When a psychologist or a psychiatrist, they used to give a psychological therapy or a rehabilitation, they preferably go for a groupism, whatever the set of psychological problems they are facing. Okay, so I can just relate to sir's questions from that particular concern. But definitely, if sir is active and if they can deliver their query through other social media platforms, so I'll happy to answer that as well.
Yes, yes, yes. I'll take question from sir. Or but I'll give your contact number to sir. So he will directly contact.
Sure, sir.
Yeah.
Sure, sure, sure.
Yeah. Students, any other questions do you have? Okay, by assuming that there's no more questions, now may I ask Dr. Naga sir to please propose formal vote of thanks. Naga sir. Naga sir, you there? Yeah.
Thank you, sir. Pravesh, sir. Really, it's a very nice interaction. Actually, we will be collaboration with you, sir, and we will work. Collaboration, we will try for the collaboration with Parole University and as well as the Centurion University of both the campuses, Bhubaneswar and as well as the AP campus. With the help of Vilas, sir.
Sure.
Sure,
Definitely.
we will do sir, something, sir. We are expecting that one. Okay, sir. And okay, first of all, thank you, Vilas, sir, for giving the opportunity to make as a vote of thanks, sir. And behalf of Centurion University, I would like to thank you, first of all, AP campus professional Professor Colonel GSN Balu, sir, Vice Chancellor of UTM AP campus, and PS Ramana Rao, sir, for Registrar of Centurion University of Andhra Pradesh campus, and Dean, School of Paramedics and Applied Health Sciences, Dr. Acharya, sir, and Head of the Department of the Centurion University, Department of Forensic Science, Mr. Vilas, sir, and faculty, Department of Forensic Science, Mr. Pravalika, madam. And I would like to also thank you to my teachers too, PC madam, Supriya Patnaik madam, Centurion University, Bhubaneswar, and Registrar madam, Anita Patra madam, and thank you for the Anita Patra madam for this arrangement of webinar. And as well also, I would like to thank you, our Dean of School of Forensic Science, Bhubaneswar, CUTM Bhubaneswar campus, Amulya Mehra, sir. And I would like to thank you all the students and other faculty who have participated in this webinar. Okay, for successfully completing this webinar, I hope you all people gain the knowledge towards this webinar. And last but not least, I would like to thank you, the one who are the expert we have received today, that Pravesh Charan, sir, from Parole University. And with this his knowledgeable talk, we are gained a huge knowledge towards the psychology, forensic psychology, and definitely the psychology and forensic psychology. And thank you very much, sir, for your valuable lecture to our students, for both the BSc and MSc students to gain their knowledge related to psychology. And thank you very much, sir, for your time and your knowledge and your patiently staying and explaining every answer. And I would like to thank you, my greatest applause to you, sir. Thank you very much, sir.
Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, sir. Professor, thank you so much for accepting our invitation and delivering the talk.
Thank you, sir.
Yeah.
Thank you very much, sir. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you all of you. Now, students, thank you so much. Students, you can leave the meet now. Thank you so much. Professor, we'll be in touch. Yeah, we'll be in touch. Thank you so much.
So, okay, so I'll go because I have to take a meeting.
Yeah. Please go ahead. Thank you.